Oh, yeah, sorry. Please go ahead, Renee. Tell me about you.
Yes. So I've been CEO here for coming up to almost 4 years. Amazingly enough, time flies. And actually, so when I joined, the company was a private company, and we were maybe about, 8 people or something. Now we are obviously public both here and in the US, and we have north of 50 people. So it's been quite a significant growth since I joined. So prior to doing this, I spent about 12 years on the investment side. So I invested in life sciences. Both worked for a company called Omega Funds, which was a specialist life science fund. And I also worked for 3i, which is a public asset manager. Worked there in their venture group. And prior to that, I spent another 12 years really in investment banking. So I worked 5 years in the US, and then again moved to London, worked for kind of big American firms generally, and ran kind of large groups there, both in terms of healthcare and technology mainly. Did corporate finance for them. And then prior to that, I had another 5 years actually where we built up a company that in today would have been known as a fintech company. At that point in time, we didn't know that it was called fintech. But that was really an options and futures trading platform, analytics platform, that we actually built up very successfully to a very large European business, and I ended up being head of sales and marketing there. At the end, when we'd set up quite a lot of businesses in different countries. So that's really kind of my career. And otherwise, I've got a, BA in finance. As you can tell, I'm not a scientist. Did not do a PhD in microbiology or anything else exciting. So really it's a BA in finance, and kind of grew up in Sweden, but I left Sweden in 88. So this has actually been my return back to Sweden. I've not actually worked in Sweden until I did this. So that's a little bit about me.
Nice. What was it like heading back to Sweden after all those years?
It's a bit weird actually, because because obviously you speak the language, but it's a bit like, where do I buy the ticket for the bus? It's a little bit like that. You're kind of completely, you have no idea how things work. And I must say I hadn't really used Swedish for quite a long time. And so it's a bit silly, but my spoken Swedish was pretty riddled with English words and expressions. So it's not kind of that easy when you just haven't been there for, a long period of time. So, but no, so it was interesting. It was a little bit like coming back as a tourist, in a way.
No, that's absolutely. Well, very interesting. So could you tell me a bit more about the company? So what's the mission and the size and the scale of where you're at today?
Sure. So the strategy really is to build kind of an integrated kind of specialty pharma business. So that means obviously we're doing research and development, but we also want to be part of commercializing our products. So we really have a focused effort on research and development in Europe, and that's focused on orphan indications and nephrology in particular. So we're particularly interested in kind of liver and kidney disease. And then what we've kind of chosen to do is really commercialize ourselves in the US. So we are not looking to commercialize in Europe. Actually, we would rather partner ex-US. So really focusing our commercial expertise in the US. So it's really kind of two completely different, kind of businesses really that we're focusing on.
Yeah. And so why the specific focus on the US and not the Europe?
So I think because we're still a small business, and so, we just have to be very careful about where we're spending our time, money, and resources.
Right.
And so actually the US, even though the healthcare system is complex to say the least, but actually it's one system over a large number of patients and physicians.
Yes.
So actually it's an easier market to kind of address because it is more homogeneous, and it's easier, particularly if you have an orphan disease. Obviously we would never do this in a GP kind of setting, but from an orphan disease, we can actually muster the expertise, the resources, et cetera, to really cover the US. In Europe, because every single country has its own rules and languages and reimbursement, it becomes actually very expensive, and far more complex actually. To even try to address this market. And that's why, since we only have one product at the moment, or one potential product in terms of reaching the market, and it's an orphan product. It makes it actually quite difficult in Europe. So it's kind of different reasons. It's, in Europe, it would have been fine if we had kind of, a very large or broad product, and we probably could have, justified the expense. But again, it's kind of like doesn't really work the same in the two places.
Absolutely. So what is the lead product that you're focusing on, and what are maybe the current treatments out there for it at the moment?
So it's an orphan disease, kidney disease. It's an autoimmune disease, and it's called IgA nephropathy. It's actually the largest glomerulonephritis that's out there, but it is an orphan disease both in the US and in Europe. And today there is nothing approved for this indication anywhere. And so what physicians are trying to do is that they are, as in most kind of CKD related indications, they put these patients on blood pressure lowering agents. So RAS blockade, different ACEs and ARBs or combinations. Because from a logical perspective, this disease is actually something that starts in your gut. It doesn't actually start in the kidney. Since it's an immune kind of disease, you actually have the vast majority of your immune system in your gut. And so that's actually, uniquely what we're doing here is we're actually not treating the kidney. We're actually delivering our drug very locally to the gut. So we're kind of interrupting or disrupting the very kind of top of the disease cascade.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of, we're therefore impacting, as I said, disrupting whatever the production of these kind of IgA antibodies. They are produced in your gut. And in this particular disease, they actually find their way out to the circulation, which is where they should not be. But what happens is these IgA antibodies who are secretory find their way out to the systemic circulation, and they then create an immune kind of response in your body because they're not supposed to be there. And so you create these autoimmune complexes which circulate, and they will ultimately deposit in your kidney. And as they deposit in your kidney, that's really where it starts with, it's a kind of inflammatory cascade that starts at that point in time. And that starts rupturing your kind of filtration mechanisms in your kidney called glomeruli. So it's really kind of a filtration, related disease.
Yeah.
And it's really, you have about 1 million of these glomeruli in each kidney. So it does take a while until you end up in end-stage renal disease, but up to 50% of patients after diagnosis will actually be at risk of end-stage renal disease. So they will continuously lose kidney function over time. And so, and that's how you can actually tell if you do a biopsy of someone with IgA nephropathy, you will see deposits in the kidney of these secretory IgA antibodies. And that's how you can kind of, know for sure that you have IgA nephropathy. So there's really kind of nothing there today. So it's as I said, it's blood pressure lowering agents. And the rationale for that is that that you have a leaking membrane. So you have these membranes which are damaged. And so that they're damaged because they're leaking protein and they're leaking blood into the urine. And so if you reduce the pressure over those membranes, then from a logical perspective, that's something that, people think, would be a good thing to do. And obviously you do that in a lot of CKD related diseases, but in most of these CKD related diseases, as here is, it doesn't really necessarily do anything with the underlying disease. It does kind of, help the symptoms, and it might kind of help in terms of kind of the pressure that the kidney's under. But, as we know, lots of these patients continue to progress with today. And then I think, what else physicians will do is they'll take whatever they have on the shelf and try and see. So obviously it's an autoimmune disease. So they will try and use, immune suppression. Yeah. So various types of kind of immune suppressants. But so far, again, none of them have actually proven to be, particularly effective, or they come with, very, very significant side effects.
So how many patients does this affect, and how many have you already sort of done clinical trials with? What stage are you at there?
So in terms of, we did our own prevalence study in Europe, and that came out at about 4 in 10,000. So it's a fairly large orphan disease, and that's about 200,000 in Europe. And we're estimating the US to be between 130 to 150,000. And in terms of, so we are actually the